The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, Madam, pursuant to Section 1091B1E-F of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2022, I am pleased to appoint the following member to the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology, Dr. Angela M. Belcher of Lexington, Massachusetts. Signed sincerely, Kevin McCarthy, Republican Leader.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4, 2021, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I would like to yield such time as he may consume to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Jankowicz.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise to address the House for 5 minutes. Catherine Cat Massey, 72, Pearl Young, age 77, Robert Drury, age 32, Ruth Whitfield, age 86, Geraldine Talley, age 62, Celestine Cheney, age 65, Aaron Salter, age 55, Haywood Patterson, age 67, Andrew McNee, age 53, Margus Morrison, age 55. Madam Speaker, these are the names and the ages of the 10 people who were brutally and senselessly murdered in my hometown of Buffalo, New York, last Saturday. I rise to say their names in these hallowed chambers. I stand here in sorrow for their deaths and for the suffering that their families and friends are enduring right now. I have thought of little else since this carnage occurred on a beautiful Saturday afternoon in Buffalo. The murderer, who I will not give the satisfaction of saying his name, targeted this grocery store and this neighborhood because it was heavily populated with African Americans. As our sheriff stated at the crime scene, this was a racially motivated act, and this was a hate crime. I do not have the honor of representing this community in Congress, but I have represented it previously. I served for many years on the Buffalo School Board and frequented this area as there were many schools in proximity. Through my services on the Buffalo School Board, I came to know Catherine Cat Massey, one of those victims. Cat was a tireless advocate for Buffalo's children, and her impact to her community will be felt for generations. I grew up in Buffalo. Buffalo is a great place for many reasons. Its stunning architecture, its location on the shores of Lake Erie, the Niagara River, its beautiful neighborhoods. But what makes our community so very special are its people. Kind, warm, fun, always a priority on family and friends and community. That, in my mind, is what makes us the spectacularly special place it is. These 10 represented some of the best of Buffalo, and we mourn their tragic loss. May God's grace be with them, with these 10 who perished and their grieving loved ones. I will conclude by saying this. Our city is right now in the national spotlight due to this vile and horrific act. But predictably and inevitably, the national attention will fade, and it will be our community's task to heal. And it's my great hope that we come together in this healing process. We unify, and we do not succumb to division and polarization. In honor of those lost, in our healing, it is my great hope we become stronger, more unified, and a more loving community. I conclude by quoting a sign that someone put up on their front lawn in my community, and I quote, "I love you. You're probably thinking you don't even know me, but if people can hate for no reason, I can love." Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
Appreciate it. my friend from New York, well-considered comments. At this time, I would like to yield to my longtime friend from Arkansas, Mr. Hill, for such time as he may consume.
Well, I thank my good friend from Texas for a few minutes this afternoon on the House floor, and I thank him for his long service to this House and to the people of Texas. Louie Gohmert has set the standard for constituent service, and the people of East Texas are grateful for his many years of service and the months to come. So thank you, my friend. Madam Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to the resounding response and intense unity that all of us as Americans have witnessed by the NATO alliance since the barbaric invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February. The history of civilization tells us that freedom and the peace and stability necessary for free people to pursue their interest, their pursuit of happiness, is not the natural state. Rather, man's fallen nature gives rise to tyranny, domination, and violence. The United States and our European friends who value their freedom, their prosperity, suffered two of the deadliest and most destructive wars which threatened the blessings of freedom and prosperity on the continent of Europe. In the wake of these world wars and in the face of the communist menace threatening elected governments, the United States and European countries realized that a freed people must stand together and to deter and, if necessary, defend the encroaching forces intent on squashing freedom and spreading communism and authoritarianism. Smartly, the United States policy insisted that she would only provide military support to Europe if Europe did its own work and was united in that effort. This principle gave rise to the first fundamental concept of collective defense, which is the backbone of our transatlantic NATO alliance. As we all know, an attack on one NATO member is treated as an attack on all. After the September 11th terror attacks on the United States, NATO invoked the Article 5 collective defense for that first time and agreed on a package of strong defensive measures to come to our aid in the war on terrorism and the attack on our homeland. It was indeed an example of the power of standing together. But as I've consistently warned since my time in the People's House, the pillar of collective defense had over time been weakened by lagging investment and commitment by many member states. Collective defense does not work unless each member is fully invested in and committed to protecting the whole. In 2014, only 3 countries met their commitment to spend not less than 2% of their gross domestic product on defense. Now think about that. In the decades since the end of the Second World War, only 3 countries. This is after decades of president after president after president urging that full commitment, starting with the frustration of President Kennedy. In contrast, this year, we've witnessed NATO member states joined in solidarity on Russian sanctions. We have seen increases in defense spending from member nations, most notably Germany, the largest economy in Europe, the most prosperous company in Europe, the largest current account surplus in Europe, the largest budget surplus in Europe, is now committed to its full obligation to the NATO partnership. NATO is also doubling the number of battle groups deployed to Eastern and Central Europe. The United States has increased its commitment of troops deployed to Europe by 25%. Now we're witnessing an historic display of 30 member countries galvanized in the face of Putin's tyranny and barbarism. And it is now attracting other European countries that see the value and realize the need to protect their way of life from the rising threat of Russia. This week, Finland and Sweden announced their desire to join NATO. This would be a strategic success for the alliance. Both Finland and Sweden are free, democratic countries with sizable and well-regarded military forces. In February, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz used the term Zeitenwende, or turning point. He's turning away from the decisions made by his predecessor, Angela Merkel, that somehow thought we were going to achieve peace with Russia through commerce. We see how that worked out. So, turning point is a key element, and I agree that we are absolutely at a turning point. As anti-democratic forces aspire to great power conflict, a free Europe has thankfully turned towards that proven collective defense of NATO. NATO members, and therefore the alliance itself, are living up to its promised ideals. NATO is as strong as it's ever been in the past 73 years. Putin must realize the catastrophic consequences that he will subject the Russian people to if he dares to go toward a NATO member. In addition to military leadership, the United States must do and use its global capabilities and amazing energy resources in this great country in support of its European allies. President Biden must end his failed energy policy and take every action to return to the 13.5 million barrels of production we had prior to the pandemic and our strategic value in this great country for every household, every business, every ally of energy independence. This will lower prices for our families. This will strengthen our allies as they move towards independence and dependence, I should say, from Russian oil and gas. And Europe is now arguing, after so many years of debate, towards an all-of-the-above energy strategy, including expanding nuclear energy. So I'm encouraged by the European response to the crisis and brutality of Putin. This unity and commitment to mutual defense is necessary to deter and defend Europe as well as the homeland. So I commend our allies for their being on the same page in an inspiring way. Now, Madam Speaker, we have more to do on economic sanctions to target and focus additional economic pain on Russia, Belarus, and any country that is economically benefiting these perpetrators of the atrocity in Ukraine. Taken together, our transatlantic partnership will send a message to all tyrants that not only Tsar Putin, but all tyrants, be any corner of the world. If you attack a sovereign country, if you invade a sovereign country using military force, you will pay a military cost. You will lose. You will pay a diplomatic cost. You will be kicked out of every organization in the world. Your diplomats will be isolated. And you will pay an economic cost for the mistakes of your leaders. So, Madam Speaker, there's much more work to be done. I'm proud of that transatlantic response. Beating Putin here is a blow for freedom. And the only thing a bully understands is the full force of military, diplomatic, and economic might. I thank my friend from Texas for the time, and I yield back to him.
Thank you, and great words. Great observations. This is a difficult time, but it's also a time to show our resilience and do so as one with those who believe in having representative government. At this time, I would like to yield such time as he may consume to my friend from Tennessee, Mr. Fleischman. It's an honor having known him for so many years and become such good friends. Yield the time to Mr. Fleischman.
I'd like to thank the distinguished gentleman, my friend from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, for yielding. Thank you, sir. My sentiments exactly right back to you, sir. Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor the life and legacy of my friend Phil Smart. Philander Knox Smart Jr. dedicated his life to public service and our Chattanooga area community. During his distinguished life, he was a founding member of the Pachyderm Club, an active member of the Chattanooga Rotary Club, served on the Hamilton County School Board, including a key role as chairman, and served on many other community and civic organizations. He was also a successful business person and a giving business person. Phil loved our great nation and was active in our nation's body politic. As a matter of fact, he was one of Tennessee's first supporters of our late great President Ronald Reagan. Phil actively supported individuals for office who stood for religious freedom and who supported our great United States Constitution. Phil passed away last week after a lengthy illness, and I was greatly saddened, and I still am. Most importantly, Phil dedicated his life always to sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ in our state, nationally, and around the world. I especially appreciated the fact that he would invite me to stake meetings and his always welcoming presence when I would show up and visit at his church. Our state and our community have lost a great man and public servant. We will miss him, and I am proud to honor his life and legacy today in this great United States House of Representatives. Phil was not only a fine man, but he was a good friend and a great American. I am thankful to have known him. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Speaker, might I inquire how much time I have remaining?
The gentleman has 43.5 minutes remaining.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To follow up on comments by my friend Mr. Hill from Arkansas, how fortunate the United States has been to have had Donald Trump as president when NATO was languishing, when there was no resolve that we could discern that would allow NATO to stand up to evil actions that were in the future to be taken by the leader there, Mr. Putin. Our allies in Europe did not seem to appreciate American President Trump questioning them about utilizing and becoming so dependent on Russian oil, and pointing out that, gee, we're spending American money to put troops in Europe and keep so many there to protect you when you're paying money to Russia and growing dependent on them so they could blackmail you for the future and extort concessions from you. And by the way, you, as a part of NATO, are expected to spend 2% on your own defense. You haven't been doing that, and you're going to start doing that. Thank goodness President Trump took those actions. It didn't make him popular with leaders in Europe, but right now, even those who didn't care for Mr. Trump, President Trump, they can surely see the value of the things, the stands he took, and the goading that he provided to get them to help prepare to stand up for their own defense. Otherwise, they would have been in position to start falling like dominoes. But because they started spending more of their money on defense and started trying to take actions that would not make them so reliant on Russian oil, they're in a better position than they would have been had we not had a president named Trump to stand up for what was right, stand up for a Republican form of government. And that's not Republican Party. It's an elected representative form of government. We call it a democracy. Many people do. It's really more of a democratic republic. We had the leader from the Hellenic Republic, Greece, gave a terrific speech here. And as I mentioned to him, I was glad he mentioned Pericles, because Pericles doesn't get enough credit for the inspiration that he provided, the logic that he provided to so many of our founders who wrote and spoke about his brilliance. That's something we're not getting a lot of in our schools. As education has now taken so much of its direction from the federal government and the Department of Education, we have schools that have increasingly been eliminating lessons in government and lessons in what it takes to sustain a republic. That's why Ben Franklin said, "It's a republic, madam, if you can keep it," because he knew, he was so well read. He knew traditionally you can't keep this phenomenal form of self-government that we made all the better, as the Prime Minister pointed out. He made it even better. We've been so blessed here in America. People take it for granted, and they do not understand that you can't sustain this self-governance if you are not teaching people what it takes to sustain it. Now, we heard the majority leader. We know he would not knowingly, intentionally misrepresent the facts, but apparently not aware of the true facts, that we don't have a majority that supports a replacement theory. We do not have a majority that fears minorities becoming the majority. No, in fact, the majority of Republicans, the huge majority, have no fear of minorities becoming a majority. Our concern about the mass influx of people that have never been educated to what it takes to have a self-governing country is that you lose it. Now, I've pointed out for years, people say, "Oh, you must hate Hispanics because you want a secure southern border." It's exactly the opposite. I look at the Hispanic culture and I see three basic, and I know it's usually not good to generalize, but I see, generally speaking, three commonalities. You have, most Hispanics have a faith in God, they have a devotion to their family, and they have a hard work ethic. Those are three things that made America the greatest nation in the history of the world. And it was so wonderful to hear the Prime Minister from Greece pointing these things out about how America, clearly they know around the world, they know you took it and you expanded the freedom, expanded, made it better than it ever was in ancient Greece, where democracy began. Years ago, There were, I think, 4 or 5 members of Congress. We had stopped. We'd made a trip to the Philippines. We went to see our American troops that were training Filipino troops to fight against radical Islam that was existing and had created so much chaos in some parts of the Philippine Islands. But we stopped on the way back to refuel at the Maldives Islands, and we were having lunch with some of their leaders. And I was talking to one of them. They're such gorgeous islands, beautiful white beaches, water crystal clear, just beautiful. But he was telling me, you know, we're a new democracy. And he said there's always rumors about a military coup taking power. And then he paused and he said, we never had a George Washington to set the proper example, so we're always worried about military coups. Well, they have had problems there. But here I was on the other side of the world, a little bitty island, and this leader knew more about our American history than so many, maybe even a majority of American students know now, about what a huge thing it was. It's depicted in one of the 8 big paintings in our rotunda of George Washington with a piece of paper in his hand. That was his resignation. He copied 13 that he sent to each governor, and this one was the original that he presented to the Continental Congress there in 1783. He had won the revolution as the head of the military. He could have been like Napoleon and been an emperor. He could have been czar, dictator, whatever, king, whatever. In fact, some wanted him to become, in essence, a king. And there he was. Congress had even given him authority to make all kinds of contracts and pay whatever he needed to pay to win the revolution. And here he was with all that power. Could have been, say, in essence, here's all the power back. I'm going home. Incredible. That was historic. And so many don't know. But leaders like the Prime Minister here this week, he knew. The Maldives, the little bitty islands, they knew. But when we have an administration like the current one, that basically, despite their saying they have secured the border is not secure. People are flooding in, and we don't fear having minorities be the majority. What some of us are concerned about is people flooding in out of control that have not been educated in what it takes to sustain a republic. Because I've heard this from other leaders in what we consider free countries around the world, and they're getting scared. They see what's happening in America and say, don't you understand? When you lose your freedom in America, there will be no more freedom in the world. This week, Ronald Reagan has been quoted a number of times, that, and the Prime Minister mentioned as well, that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. But for America to lose our freedom, which is what is in the process of happening when you take more and more right of the American people and give it to the federal government, and you give more and more right to the Department of Justice and intelligence to spy on the American people, and you have an attorney general who seizes more and more power and says, we're going to start spying on people that raise questions at school board meetings. You are jeopardizing self-government. And to even think about creating a disinformation board that truly was, oh, it's been put on pause, a ministry of truth. The government gets to tell you what you can believe and not believe. Might as well just start calling us the Soviet Union. Good grief, I can't believe how close we have come to what George Orwell, using his pen name, described in 1984. As I've said before, it's appearing that the main thing he got wrong was a year. It wasn't 1984, it's now. But people have got to wake up. And for those, and I've heard it around everywhere I go, including the airport here, the airport in Texas, you've got to do something about the price of gasoline, price of diesel. It's making everything go up. I don't have money to fill my tank. Well, who caused that? The Biden administration. Who caused the shortage of formula? The Biden administration. And we already got a question from TV station back in Tyler, Channel 19. They always try to pick things apart. Well, I didn't vote for this new bill that's supposed to fix baby formula. Well, I can tell you, giving millions of dollars to the FDA or the Biden administration is not going to produce one drop of baby formula. And in fact, if they were going to be the ones to fix things, they would never have allowed us to get to this point. But what happened? Without any regard for what would happen, they went after the Abbott facility, and it turns out none of the formula was found to have been contaminated. Yet they created this shortage, and now this administration thinks the solution is more government, more money to the government. If we could just get more money, more people employed in the government, we can fix anything. No, that's why we have a shortage, because government is not the answer. Government is not the answer to getting cheaper gasoline prices and diesel prices and stopping inflation. Government right now is has been creating inflation. It's time to allow the incredible economy that wants to grow and wants to be a pie that is not a zero pie where everybody just gets smaller shares. No, it grows. We get a bigger pie. And nobody explains the economy and what can help fix things in this body better than my friend from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert. And at this time, Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield back the time so it may be assumed by the gentleman from Arizona.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4th, 2021, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, is recognized for the remainder of the hour as a designee of the minority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. May I inquire to time remaining?
The gentleman has 27 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. And Congressman Gohmert, thank you. I appreciate it. It's the joy of this week's schedule and then trying to get our floor time. Look, I try to come behind the mic at least every week when we're here. And the last few times, I've been rather cranky. I'm intensely frustrated on policies of the majority. You know, the majority, the Democrats, the left have controlled this place now for what, 15 months. Poor people are poor, working poor are poor, middle class is poor, and there's just this frustration for people like myself on we got to stop it, stop hurting people. And a couple of the responses to the YouTube video that went out on one of the previous floor speeches was, okay, just give us something optimistic. So let's try to do something optimistic today. But understand, this optimism requires this body to think differently, particularly my brothers and sisters in the majority. On occasion, you're going to have to back away from who writes checks, and start to think about what would the future look like if we would just even fixate, focus, consider, listen to some of these ideas. First one, and I've been to the floor multiple times on this, and I'm not going to even start with the debt chart, which used to be a tradition, but I would often stand here with this chart saying, hey, do you realize in the next 29 years, we're functionally heading to, what is it, like $112, $115 trillion of borrowed money in today's dollars. And the thing we are terrified to tell the American people is 75% of that is functionally Medicare. The other 25% is the shortfall in Social Security. It's demographics. But when you break it apart, that $80+ trillion of borrowing that's in today's dollars, that is the shortfall in Medicare, 31% of that is just diabetes. 33% of all healthcare spending in the United States is diabetes. If you wanted to lower the cost of healthcare, if you wanted to make healthcare more available and accessible, you got to stop doing what this place has been doing for a couple decades now, where we play the game on who pays and who gets subsidized. Obamacare, the ACA, was about who gets subsidized and who had to pay. The Republican alternative had some of the same sin, and heaven knows Medicare for All is purely a financing scam. It isn't about what we pay. So let's actually do some things that are hopeful. We've been tracking the theory behind this for a couple years now. And it's functionally replacing insulin-producing cells. I did a whole presentation on how they take stem cells and convert them and tap them with a CRISPR so your body doesn't want to reject them. But the fact of the matter is we've now had a couple people who've been cured of type 1 diabetes. Now, it's a proof of concept study. They've begun phase 1. Right now, the FDA has them on a pause as they're working out dosing. But the fact of the matter is we're that close conceptually to a cure for type 1. And the fact of the matter is the premise works for type 2, but you got to deal with some of the ancillaries, which are really uncomfortable conversation. I represent, we believe, the population with the second highest diabetic population in the world, one of my tribal communities. Mr. Speaker, and many of the others here, we may have urban populations that have diabetic populations, are rural poor. The fact of the matter is, wouldn't it be amazing if Republicans and Democrats in this place were fixating on this concept of, we're going to fixate on curing the misery. We're not going to go out and build a bunch more clinics and say we care, so live with your misery. The concept that there's a chance that if we put our resources in the right place, just like Operation Warp Speed did, remember how many people here said, you can't do that in a year, but they did it. And then we could actually have the more difficult debate here of, if this is cure for type 1, how do you move into type 2? What do you do for lifestyle, health, what we eat? And there's some data out there we've been working on that shows one of the key contributors to income inequality in our society is the fact that family members are suffering, they're having their toes cut off. It's health. So we hear speech after speech after speech after speech here about income inequality, the working, the poor, da, 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 da. But how about embracing technology and taking a run at it? And yeah, there's a chance it doesn't work. But we're talking trillions and trillions of spending in our near future just on diabetes. Isn't it worth investing in ending the misery? And there's hope. But that's actually something that would be honorable and noble and compassionate and moral. But it doesn't fit the playbook here because that isn't the people showing up here writing you a check. And a point of reference we got to get through our heads. 5% of our brothers and sisters who have chronic conditions, often multiple chronic conditions, are the majority of healthcare spending. So if 5% is functionally 50% of all the spending, what happens if you help cure some of those chronic conditions? You want to have an impact on the cost of healthcare. Stop thinking of it as a financing problem. Think of it as a cures issue. And I will argue this is optimistic. It's hopeful. We're in a time of technology miracles. And when was the last time you had anyone, particularly from the majority, talk about something that was optimistic, that could make the poor less poor, make society healthier, provide opportunity that didn't also require government running our lives? In many ways, this does just the opposite. It sets us free. And this isn't pie in the sky. Some of this is happening around us. I mean, this week, I should have brought the picture, but FDA approved a home COVID test that does more than COVID. It actually also does detects flu and RSV, and it's a home test, and it's been approved. So this isn't utopian. It exists. The other thing, it becomes a more difficult conversation is, if we care about people, we care about freedom, we care about crashing the price of healthcare, why not legalize technology? So I just sort of show this as just, in some ways, it's as much about the picture to get the concept. Let me tell the story first. A few years ago, I'm reading some of the crazy blogs and research stuff that, I sit on an airplane 10 hours a week. And there's this story about this material science professor who has built this thing that you blow into and instantly, well, pretty instantly, tells you have a virus. Can figure out sort of the category of the virus, and then turns around and can ping off your medical records on your phone, and theoretically could actually order your antivirals. And the newer generations are doing much more than just the category of virus. They're picking up bacteria. There's even one out there that the researchers say we can pick up a number of dead cancer proteins, because when a cancer cell dies, it throws off that dead DNA strip. It's functionally a flu kazoo. I thought you'd like that name. What's the problem with that technology? In this place, it's illegal. You'd have an algorithm writing a prescription. You'd have a pharmacist filling a prescription. The Social Security Act says you will see a doctor, not an algorithm, not something you can have in your home medicine cabinet that you can blow into. But do we actually care about people? Or do we care about the people lining up at our offices who want to slow down the technology? Think of the lobbying that goes on in this place to stop telehealth. The fact of the matter is, I've done telehealth here for a dozen years. And the number of times my office was full of people say, we really like the technology, but we need to slow it down. We don't think you have enough cost controls. They would do anything because it changed the economics of delivering health care. Pandemic hit. To the majority's credit, a piece of legislation I'd worked on for years, they grabbed that language, plugged it in. That's our telehealth expansion we have today. You do realize it goes away. The expansion on telehealth goes away when the pandemic's declared over. And there's people lobbying on Capitol Hill to make sure that happens. So we talk about how much we care, but the fact of the matter is, opportunities, technologies, the ability to use this to stay healthy, if it's not making certain people money, they're here on this campus trying to lobby against it. And you start to realize this isn't utopian. The technology exists. When you have a breath biopsy that you can blow into that instantly can tell you if you have COVID. Why doesn't this place look forward? Because so much of the policy we have debated here, it's as if we're talking about the 1990s. And the fact of the matter is there's investment all coming in. This is another breath biopsy, the things you can wear that someone like myself, I have hypertension. You know, you wear the thing on your wrist and helps you manage it. And Mr. Speaker, one of the simplest things, and it's not even a thought experiment. 16% of all U.S. healthcare spending is functionally related to people not taking their medicines. So if you have hypertension, do you take your hypertension medicine? You have, high cholesterol, do you take your statins? The things that keep you from having a stroke. A pill bottle lid that just beeps at you when you forgot to take your medicine in the morning, or the thing that drops the pills for grandma to stay healthy. The model says it's 550 million, actually it's 550 billion. 550, so 16% of healthcare spending, $550 billion a year. It's $500 billion a year, more than $500 billion a year. If you just use something as simple as a pill bottle lid that reminded you needed to take your healthcare, your medicines. Now, I know that's a little utopian, it wouldn't be the complete adoption, but it's the concept. There are solutions around here that exist. We're just incapable of discussing them because they don't fit sort of the blinded, narrow vision, because we had our talking points from our political campaigns a decade ago, and we haven't read a damn article since then. And so my fixation also on telehealth is how about people in areas that don't, my Navajo Nation that doesn't have Wi-Fi? Well, the fact of the matter is you're seeing it in Ukraine right now, aren't you? When you have satellite broadband that's available to functionally every place in North America right now, wouldn't it be moral, cheaper, more efficient, and actually forward-looking, saying, hey, maybe the solution for the family is in the middle of rural America, give them the plate-shaped satellite dish, and boom, they have Wi-Fi. They have broadband. It makes them available to use telehealth. Would that be something? Or instead, we're going to subsidize billions and billions and billions of dollars to maybe run a strip of fiber out there, which we've been doing for decades. It's time we actually sort of enter this century. And then there's other things that just drive me nuts. So how much discussion have you had from the White House, from the Democrat leadership here about supply chains? Much of inflation isn't their fault. It's not their spending. It's not their regulatory process. It's not the changing the capital stack, restricting access to hydrocarbons. It's not their fault. It's not their policies. It's shipping. But then they do brilliant things like this, where they actually have in their Build Back Better legislation, they slipped a sentence in there saying you don't get to automate the ports. So think about how insane this is. The giveaway to the Longshoremen Union was so important to the Democrats that they'll give speeches about how we need to fix the supply chain, we need to get the goods moving, but we're going to make sure that you can't do it through automation. It's in their legislation. Do we have a vision of what the future can be, where it's more productive, more prosperous, more hopeful, more opportunity for everyone? Or does our majority here of Democrats continue to slip little things like in this that basically calcify the misery that's in our communities right now? And why this slide is important is if we're forward-looking. I just came across this, and it's the thought experiment. So a couple SpaceX engineers have a company, and they're working apparently with the rail community and I know this picture isn't great. It's little autonomous electric platforms. So you'd pull a container off and put it right on the platform, and that container drives to where it's supposed to go. It's a little spur crossing. It's going to Arizona storage if it's leaving the Port of Long Beach, but through the port of that Alameda corridor that's all backed up for those of us who lean more towards the west. But it's a technology solution. And instead of this place holding hearings of saying, what are the regulatory barriers? What are the labor regulatory barriers? There's an optimistic solution. This place will run away from it because if one of the union groups doesn't like it. it becomes power and money, not what's actually good for the American people. But there are solutions like this of autonomous rail cars. And they're run by batteries. This one's been out for a few years, and they're working on it. It's actually making amazing progress. And you're hearing the discussions right now of food insecurity around the world. I believe it's mostly University of Illinois has been doing this amazing work on how to get plant productivity dramatically better. And I've done whole presentations here on the floor about C4 plants, C3 plants, and how you tweak them. You remember God made the plants, so sometimes they grab an oxygen molecule. They really wanted the carbon molecule. And I apologize for the folks trying to take this down. Wave at me if I'm talking too fast. Had a lot of coffee, which is a typical day. But the optimism of what would this mean to feeding the world? What would this mean to inflation? What would this mean just for the morality of there being the efficiency of you need less food or fuel, water, fertilizer, if the technology is real? And the early reports, it's pretty darn impressive. So we're holding hearings on this, right? We're having discussions of how this would be amazing to help the world grow more food and protect the environment. Of course not, because there's no one showing up with a check to talk about this. And the next one I'm going to show you is just my fixation. You do realize in the last functionally decade, the United States has removed so much baseload nuclear power that it's functionally equaled every bit of renewable that's hit the grid. So on one hand, we have this optimism. Think about all the photovoltaic and wind. Isn't this exciting? Oh, by the way, we removed so much baseload nuclear power. We haven't gone anywhere. And I know there's a huge cadre of my colleagues here that despises nuclear power. So when you have a Nobel Prize physicist saying, hey, we think there's actually a way you could use a high pulse laser to break nuclear materials down. When you actually have other people reporting that saying we actually need to be taking the spent nuclear and refining it because our nuclear stocks have crashed. There's a long history of that. Post-Cold War, lots of the weapons grade, we've been knocking it down to use in other uses, and now that stockpile's running out. But why wouldn't you invite this physicist here to Capitol Hill and say, what would it take investment-wise, time-wise, to have a way to break down nuclear waste? You remember, he's the guy with the Nobel Prize. This place isn't. This is optimism. This is hope. And then you have other things. You know, I remember talking about this technology as a kid, of how you could build batteries. We used to refer to them as a rust battery, where it's a closed loop. They're very heavy. They only work in functional utility grade. You couldn't have them in your car. But they don't use rare earths. Why aren't these people here on Capitol Hill talking to us about how we could fix our power storage situation, particularly for those of us in the West where during the afternoon we have all this photovoltaic come in, but then the sun goes down and we're still running our air conditioning and we have this crash. There's hope, there's opportunities. Do all these work? I don't know. But that's what this body is supposed to be about, is what does the future look like? Instead, we're litigating ideas that are 20 years out of date. This one actually is out there right now in, I guess, near Houston, where they actually have a gas-fired power plant. I believe it's called the Allen cycle, and it has no smokestacks. They basically use the throw-off to spin. So you burn, you spin. Instead of boiling water and having the steam spin it, it's the burn that spins the turbines, and then they capture all the CO2 and functionally save it and use it for other sources. There's no smokestack. This is up and running today. And yes, it's had some engineering problems, but the concept, why don't we talk about this? If you say you care about greenhouse gases and we care about the fact that much of America may have brownouts, blackouts, power-wise in the United States this year, there's a way that technology is the solution. And this last one I'm going to do just because it is the quintessential that sometimes there is a solution, but no one's figured out really how to make a bunch of money on it, so no one here is going to ever talk about it. A number of my brothers and sisters on the left despise natural gas. I'm fascinated with it because you do realize a couple of years ago, the expansion of fracking and natural gas got us within a couple hairs of actually the Paris Accords, without us even being part of the Paris Accord agreement. And it was because of natural gas. And my brothers and sisters on the left who despise natural gas, well, it's the excuse of, well, there's methane. There's methane leakage. And methane is like 9 to 1 in the global warming calcs, even though its half-life is disputed a bit. Okay, so if we had a way to deal with the methane bleed, would my Democrat colleagues functionally let Wall Street, let pension plans, everyone else finally go back to investing in natural gas? Well, there's a number of research out there that said, hey, did you know that if you can take kitty litter, clay, I think they tag it with some copper oxide, it becomes a methane sponge. And it's really, really cheap. It's functionally clay. Why wouldn't we have a hearing about this and have a discussion saying, you're saying we could be going back to extracting lots of natural gas because the price is off the charts? And why this is so important is, do not let someone lie to you and say, well, the reason your gas prices, the reason the natural gas prices are so high is, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The futures market last September, October was telling us that fuel prices were about to go off the charts. It had already begun. It was substantially because of the cancellations of pipelines, permits, and the capital stack, the threat that the Securities and Exchange Commission was going to require all sorts of disclosures. The fact of the matter is, this majority became very hostile to hydrocarbons. It was already coming. The Russian invasion just made some of these prices that you're going to suffer through this summer happen earlier. And part of the excuse is, well, natural gas, yes, it's half the environmental load of maybe coal, but they still hate it, because of that methane. Okay. How about if I came to you and said, it doesn't cure all the problem, but it would cure part of it. There's a solution. So, Mr. Speaker, my last comment. This place has been miserable for the last 15 months. It's been dour, it's been angry, it's been sad. Wouldn't it be interesting if somewhere in here our colleagues on the left and the right just held a few hearings and said, what does the future look like for technology disruption that's good for poor people, it's good for the working poor, it's good for the middle class? Instead of sort of this march towards screw them, let them suffer, because our ideology is more important than what's really going on, because both parties here deserve to be judged by not our words, not our virtue signaling, but what we actually accomplished. Take a look at what we did when we had the full majority. Go take a look at the economy in 2018, 19, first quarter of 2020, because we fully intend to judge you for what you did this 2 years. And the fact of the matter is, income inequality, food insecurity, the poor, the middle class, all had a hell of a lot better economy, a better life during our years than yours. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.